Hello and welcome back to NoBS. Today we return to talking about TV shows getting reboots, specifically ones getting rebooted with minority characters. Yes, they're black and brown washing pretty much everything they can these days as a way to virtue signal to leftists and to pander to the woke SJW crowd. PC culture is certainly on the rise here in America, and recently it's come across a new title that's come under their censors. They've decided to zero in and focus in on a classic late 80s, early 90s TV show. I'm, of course, talking about The Wonder Years. For those who don't know, The Wonder Years was a very iconic, very classic TV show from way back in the late 80s, early 90s. And this show was pretty groundbreaking. It had a good story, had interesting characters. It kicked off the career of people like Fred Savage and other actors in television. It was a really, really big hit. And it basically was the story of this family that was growing up in the 1960s and 70s. Now, remember, this came out in the late 80s, but it was mimicking stuff that happened in the 60s and 70s. So it kind of has that Happy Days kind of effect where people used to think, like, I know when I was a kid, I watched Happy Days, the show. I used to think it was actually recorded way back in the 50s, but actually Happy Days was made like in the 80s and they were mimicking the 50s and blah, blah, blah. It's like one of those historical things. And the same kind of thing could be said with The Wonder Years. The Wonder Years was similar in that regard, a big hit like Happy Days too, but more of a serious, like kind of like drama, like a coming of age story. It talked about this kid. Fred Savage played this kid who was the main character. And yeah, he was just growing up. He was learning his life. His name was Kevin Arnold in the show, and he had a girl that he had a crush on named Winnie. And then he had a big brother who used to argue with him, and his parents were in the show. There was a sister, there was a narrator, all this classic stuff. It was a very good show. It had a lot of like historical references in it because they would play music from the 60s and 70s that had like really iconic music on the show. They also had episodes featuring things that happened historically, like references to events and presidents and wars and stuff like that. So it was groundbreaking. And what's happening now is they're rebooting the show. But get this is the thing. This is the trick. This is the kicker. They're rebooting the Wonder Years, but they're going to make the family black now. Now, this is obviously a very big difference than the original show. The original show was set in the past. It was about Americans, like about these white American family, European descendants. So to change the color of everything really changes the whole show. Like I wouldn't even say it's a Wonder Years reboot at this point. It's just like a whole new show kind of inspired by it. Like maybe you call it a spinoff. And I think it's just going the way, it's just funny because we're seeing this kind of thing happen across the country. Everything's getting woke. Like there's a lot of pro black stuff out there, which isn't necessarily wrong. Like we don't have any problem with shows about different characters, about different races. Like I have nothing against any groups of people, but to rewrite this thing and to redo it and to kind of like blackwash all these characters, that's the problem. And that's the thing that gets us worried too. It's like, oh, you're going to make a new Wonder Years. That could be cool. Like maybe we'll be interested in that. But if it's going to already come out the gate being this woke garbage, like that's where we're going to have to draw a line and call it out. And also, we'll get to later is this is a failed strategy that's failed before on another show that got rebooted in a very similar way. But before we get to that, let's first talk about the new Wonder Years reboot. CBS article here has more details. It says, pilot for the Wonder Years reboot featuring black family in the works. Fans of the Wonder Years could be in luck because a pilot for a reboot of the beloved show is in the works at ABC. The potential new series will be set in the late 1960s, the same era in which the original show began, but this time it will center around the life of a black family instead of a white one. The proposed 30-minute comedy series has received a pilot production commitment from the network, meaning a pilot of the show will be produced for ABC. The show will also receive a mini writer's room if ABC approves the pilot script, the network announced on Wednesday. The goal for the show to be developed for the 2021-2022 season. So we're still over a year away from that happening. But already it sounds strange, like I was saying, like they're just totally changing the story. Like, we're talking about average American, like coming of age story, and now it's going to be black family in the same time period, which seems weird to me. Like, I guess it could be interesting because they're going to go through like some more civil rights stuff and more like probable like racism is probably going to be involved, but it's just like a whole other story. Like we're talking about a slice of life story to going from this whole woke political thing. Like it's obviously going to be very political. And this whole thing, I can't even imagine how bad it's going to be when it comes out. It's a bad idea. Like this kind of stuff gets overdone by all the executives. Everyone wants to chime in and make it like the right amount of diversity and all that stuff too. It's going to end up being like a lot of white people in the show, like being racist. I'm sure, it's like bad premise for sure. And that's why I could see a lot of people getting worried. The original coming of age series aired from 1988 to 1993 on ABC. It revolved largely around Kevin Arnold, played by Fred Savage, his main love interest and neighbor, Gwendolyn Winnie Cooper, played by Danica McKellar, and his best friend, Paul Pfeiffer, played by Josh Saviano. As they navigated their teenage years during a transformative period in history, the new project will aim to show how a middle-class black family made sure it was the wonder years for them too, according to the network. In another departure from the original show, the proposed reboot is set in Montgomery, Alabama, the network said. The original characters led their lives in an unspecified suburb. So, again, we're seeing how they're changing it so much, it's like basically not even close to the same show. And, doing something different is good. Like, they're definitely getting the right idea. Like, you have to mix it up. But I think it just goes to show that this idea of rebooting stuff is just bad. Like reboots are overdone and just weak, and it's just easy and it's like terrible. It's been happening to a lot of these shows and it always goes bad. Like we talked about how they're making like a Saved by the Bell reboot. They're rebooting a lot of other shows and characters, and it's just always going to be wrong and like turn political. Like with Saved by the Bell, they had like an alphabet character playing the new main character instead of Zach like character. And in this one, we're obviously getting a black family instead of a white one. On top of that, we're also getting a location of Montgomery, Alabama, which again is not really the spirit of the original show. Like that's why it was in an unspecified suburb. It was just like middle America. It could be anywhere in America, like it could have been in any suburb, any kind of similar state. But to make it specifically in Montgomery, I can already see where that's going. I mean, we're talking about the South. They're going to be dealing with civil rights again. There's going to be like protests or something too. Like this is going to be a racist kind of area for that time period specifically. It was a lot to be wanted back then. Like we're talking about the 60s before the Civil Rights Amendment and other things fixed things up there. So it could be interesting, but again, reboots are bad, and woke ones with woke cast is always going to be a bad look too. Here, the actress said she got an email from the other actor. She says, "I can't wait to see what he and Lee Daniels sent create. I have no doubt it will both honor the original show and do justice to the realities of growing up black in the 1960s. So she's getting woke. She's getting with it. Danica McKellar is a stone cold hottie now, by the way. She totally kept her stuff together, if you know what I mean. Saladin Peterson, a former co-executive producer for The Big Bang Theory, will write and executive produce the reboot, with Empire creator Lee Daniels also serving as an executive producer. Mark Velez, the president of Lee Daniels Television within Lee Daniels Entertainment, will also executive produce. Savage is slotted to direct and executive produce as well. The original series co-creator Neil Marlins will serve as a consultant. McKellar tweeted her excitement. We just read that tweet. And that's about that part of the story. It's going to be a woke reboot. It's going to be very tricky. It could be good. Like I said, I'm not really going to totally discount it. Like they have some interesting ideas, but if they don't avoid all that super woke stuff and they don't do it carefully, like if they don't come across, I think I'm worried it's going to be very anti-white, like a lot of these things end up being, and if they don't have that kind of nuance and it just comes across as too much like that, it's going to be a real mess. And that's kind of what I would expect from ABC, a Disney-owned company. So it doesn't have a good of promise. And it also is following a failed method. So here's the other example I wanted to bring up. I almost did a video about this before, but no one really talks about it or knows about it. So it kind of just missed all of our radars. But basically, they did the same kind of thing with Party of Five. Party of Five is another show from the 90s, and they rebooted it recently. It went on this Freeform channel, and they made it a Hispanic family. And this thing got really bad. It was really cringe. And the way it played out was actually much different than the original too. And it didn't really capture it the same. Like when you change these races like that, the whole story changes. And it's just like, why even call it Party of Five? Like, why even call the other show The Wonder Years when it's really just like, another show? Like maybe give it a second title, but don't give it the same title as the original, implying it's the same. So basically with this one though, this is an example of Party of Five reboot, changing the characters. Like they had white characters in the original, now it's brown, and it failed. The show failed. It did one season and it got kicked out because it was bad. And that's the point. Is like this is a failed tactic that the Wonder Years is using now, and they should have looked to this example and seen that this is a bad idea. Now, to get into the specifics of this, what I found interesting was they made the family Hispanic in Party of Five, which also like made them change the whole premise. The original premise of Party of Five was about how this family of five people, like five kids, they lose their parents in like a tragic accident. And I believe it's a car crash, and it results in like the older kids kind of helping raise the younger kids, and they all kind of have to stick together. And that's what happened in the original Party of Five. That was a big hit show. It was on for many seasons. It brought up lots of big actors who are still around today, like Matthew Fox, who went on to be in the Lost series. It had other good actors like Lacey Chabert, other people like this. Like the original Party of Five was legit. A bit of a drama, like, you know, I think it had some sense of humor to it. I didn't actually watch it too closely like the other show, but yeah, the original Party of Five, it had this accidental death of the parents that caused the kids to have to raise themselves. Now, let's talk about the reboot, because the reboot not only made the characters all Hispanic, but it also put in this immigration story because their parents, I think, get pulled away by ICE and they're like sent back to Mexico. So the kids have to stay and take care of themselves. And I don't know if they eventually die from that. Anyway, changing that part of the backstory, like giving the parents to have them taken away by ICE, it's actually a much different premise than the original. Like the original was the parents died in a car crash. It seemed like just a total accident. They might have been something else to it. Like, I don't know, they might have been intoxicated or something, but from what I remember, it was an accident. And then in this case, if they get taken away by ICE, that's not really an accident. That means these Hispanic people had their parents commit a crime. They came here illegally, they broke the law, and then the law eventually caught up with them and took them out. So you could see how that's two different premises. Like it's very different. It's like people losing their parents for bad luck, or people losing their parents because their parents made bad decisions. So I think that's a noteworthy difference in the whole idea that it was like accidental. Like they try to push the premise that the Hispanic family was like a similar kind of accident, like it wasn't their fault, but obviously it was. I mean, I don't want to victim blame them or anything like that, but I think just pointing out that difference is a big reason why the show was different and failed. And that's what's happening with Wonder Years 2. They're fundamentally changing the whole makeup of the show, and that's cool if you want to do a spin-off or a sequel series. But since these are marketed as reboots and they're called the same title as the original, to me, it's just cheap and messed up, and it's just woke pandering too that needs to stop. That about wraps things up. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure you comment your thoughts on everything below. Tell me what you think about this new Wonder Years show. Tell me if you saw this Party of Five show as well. And also hit the like button to help this video get shared. Until next time, have a great day.